Excuse this long post, but I'm trying to give lots of detail and specifics on this experience. Let me first clarify that this was 4 years ago, when I was 15 on muzzleloader's mule deer hunt in the far northeastern part of Utah, which contains some of the most remote and beautiful places in the state. I've been frequently out in this area, spreading in Summit County that cuts in and out of lower Wyoming since before I can remember, including lots of hiking, backpacking, camping, hunting, and being involved in some of my grandfather's work. I am skeptical of things not proven by methods of science, but I don't deny all those things. I find that it's impossible for science to know all that is out there in our vast world. My grandfather is a recently retired biologist and former conservation officer for the state, and was a regional specialist and was over wildlife and habitat management for many years. He's done everything from habitat management programs, controlled fires to benefit areas, to quite literally wrangling moose to be transplanted and darting black bears. He's seen mountain lions, bears, birds, and all kinds, small mammals, ruminants, plants, and natural phenomena for a majority of his life. And he understands so much that many people, including myself, will never be able to even imagine. He's scientific, honest, straightforward, level-headed. He's agnostic and is not superstitious, and often used to, lovingly and respectfully, tease a certain CO who thinks certain Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and other beings exist. Other than his experience, he has never encountered an animal that he could not at least partially, if not completely, identify. And other than the natural, innate fear of being in close quarters with a bear, drunken and belligerent hunter, or incredibly potent tranquilizer medication, he's told me over and over he's never been terrified of an animal or experience like this. Only curious or surprised. It was late September, and we were in a small camp by a lake in the high Uinta Mountains, hunting both grouse and mule deer with muzzleloaders. The camp was a small collection of men and women whom my grandfather worked with over the years as a supervisor / biologist / CO, and these were people I grew up with. One of the women, a new wife to one of the guys, had shot a buck deer, injuring but not killing it immediately, and they had lost track of it. Devastated by the thought of wasting the animal, she returned to camp in the afternoon upset, and concerned that the deer had run into an even more secluded area of the mountain, which was hard to reach from the trail that she had shot from. A place my grandfather was familiar with, because it was such a pain in the ass to get to. With lots of deadfall and steep terrain, we volunteered to go in the late afternoon to search for the deer, following a scant blood trail that she had tracked for a while before getting fatigued and intimidated by the terrain. Because both my grandfather and I were in good shape, and he was so familiar, it didn't seem like a big deal. Before we left, she mentioned hearing what she assumed was coyotes, which made her even more so concerned that if the deer died, they would ruin the meat and hide before she could harvest it. We took off in the early evening, expecting to be back within an hour or two after searching and having our guns with us, in case we found the animal still alive or came across another buck worth trying to harvest. It was steep in places, with lots and lots of deadfall of varying height, making the hike slower and more tedious than we had hoped, making us understand the other hunters' fatigue. She had marked the blood trail with bright orange pieces on the trees, which we followed for maybe 20 minutes, and then it got hard to track. The sun was getting close to setting at this point, and we knew getting out would just be as long as getting in. We just about decided to stop when we found a spot near a fallen tree, that looked like it had recently been bedded down in, followed with spatters of fairly fresh blood, and we continued for longer. When the sun had just about set and the light had faded from the trees, we removed the firing caps from our guns to make them now completely safe, as it was now illegal and irresponsible to hunt in such absence of decent light. My grandfather had pulled out his large maglite flashlight from his pocket, and I put in my headlamp and began the hike back, using our GPS to find the trail ahead. About 10 minutes on the way back, we started to hear more movement among the trees. It was normal for animals to start moving now that the sun had gone down, as animals would likely be starting to head toward clearings for water, or to graze in the safety of lower light. Small and distant sounds of crunching leaves, patterings of hooved animals, or small bits of movement in the trees from squirrels or birds were common and expected. We did not expect the deafening, disturbing sound we heard next, which vaguely and initially reminded me of a coyote howl, but by a few seconds in, it was unidentifiable, frightening and human-like. It started with what sounded like a person screaming, but then got louder and more intense, with a screech to it. So unlike any coyote or any animal we have ever heard. Then was the almost chittering that came in between the shrieks, and the movement of the trees becoming almost calculated, almost threatening. We stopped dead in our tracks, frozen, as my grandfather started using the light to look around. I was far more freaked out than him at this point. He just seemed perplexed, curious, and a little baffled at what could make that sound. It sounded human, but with no words. With no urge of tone of help or I'm just screaming to mess with you. We continued on after it mostly stopped, and it seemed like the other natural and distant sounds had gone almost silent. I listened intently to the sound of my boots crunching with the dry aspen leaves underfoot, trying to tell myself that it was just some weird coyote with a horribly deformed larynx or something. Maybe 20 minutes from the main trail that would lead us to the truck, we heard the chittering sound again and sounds of thumping against dead trees. Looking around with our lights, in between deadfall, maybe 12 to 15 feet in front of us, was a large, human-looking thing. It was almost hunched down, with a long, slender arm around the front of a standing aspen. The aspen, of course, was pale white, with the knots being dark brown. And whatever it was, had skin almost as pale. I caught a very brief glimpse of its face. It seemed round and the eyes seemed sunken, and I could not tell you the eye color, other than a flash of reflection on the eye from my light. And that its face seemed sunken and emaciated. I didn't see any fur or hair. I never felt like it looked right at me, nor my grandfather, and just in our direction, almost confused and curious. Like he was before with the sound. For a mere couple of seconds, I caught a glimpse of it, but that was it. I looked down at the ground, holding my eyes shut, trying to imagine being safe and secure in the truck, and my grandfather took a few stumbling steps backwards toward me. I heard the thing go off to our side, moving quickly and with purpose through the trees, to the side, and then drop down behind us, I would assume according to the sound. But I hope it went in the opposite direction. My grandfather turned to where it had veered off, as to follow it, but he soon stopped and looked at me. I had never before, and never since, seen him so confused, baffled, horrified, curious, and in awe. I was crying at this point, ugly crying, trying to muffle my shaking breath and voice. And I asked him, "What was that?" Over and over I asked, and he had no answer for me. He pulled his gun off his shoulder and put a cap back on the nipple of the igniter, making the gun live, and he then carried it in front of his body in his arms. He pulled out another headlight to put on himself. We started walking toward the trail. As he listed off, I was like talking to himself as to what it wasn't. Things like, couldn't have been a deer, or elk, or moose. It had arms. It was hunched. It stood upright. Or a bear? A very sick bear? It could have been a bear. Was it the light? We heard the sound, the screeching human howl, distantly once more, before reaching the trail, which was dirt and gravel, but fairly flat and no deadfall. We practically jogged to the truck. I locked the doors immediately and sobbed, and my grandfather turned on music as loud as possible, trying to distract me on the way back to the camp. I was a mess when I arrived back, and he went to talk with the others by the fire when he got me settled in my sleeping bag in my bunk. He explained to his friends, but I don't know what all was said. The next day, everyone was extra sweet to me, trying to comfort me and saying it was probably a sick animal that looked scary in the dark. The deer the hunter shot was found the next day in daylight, scavenged quite harshly by what I assume was coyotes. To this day, he has no clue what it was, nor what sound that was. And before and since, I've heard both coyote and many other animal sounds that never even compare to that sound. The scientist in me, and in him, the hopeful and blissfully ignorant people in us, hope and speculate it was just a deformed, sick animal in scant light. But I still have no clue what that thing was, and I hope I never experience it again. This happened around 20 to 25 years ago, and I don't remember the exact year. I must have been around 10 to 13 years old, and my brother is 2 years older than me. When I was a kid, every year for the Easter school holidays, my family would go out camping on some land that my grandparents owned. The best thing about it was having somewhere to legally ride our motorbikes. My brother and I would often jump on our bikes and head off riding around the property together, racing and making up silly games, etc. One year, we were both out riding, but had gone separate ways. So at this time, I was on my own, with nobody else anywhere in sight. Suddenly, I heard a voice say my name. I heard it clearly, over the sound of the two-stroke bike engine, and it didn't sound muffled through my helmet. It sounded more like it was being spoken directly into my ear, or as if I had a headphone or earbud in my ear. At first, I disregarded it. Thought it was some strange interaction of the exhaust sound, the ear cavity on my helmet, and the wind blowing across the helmet visor. Basically, some kind of auditory illusion. But I heard it again, and again. A woman's voice, calmly, saying my name as if to get my attention. It would occur when I was riding in one small area, and nowhere else. I'd say the area was a radius of 50 meters to 75 meters. It was an area we had to pass through to get from camp to the motorbike trails and back. The voice persisted for days in the same spot, and it increased its vocabulary. It would sometimes say my name. It would sometimes say, "Come home." and it would sometimes say, "Come to me, Cole." It started to creep me out, and I would feel anxious when approaching the area where it would happen. After a few days, and me not saying anything about it to anyone, I was out riding with my brother, and he signaled for me to stop, and pulled up right in the middle of the area I'd been hearing the voice. He turned his bike off and removed his helmet, so I did the same. We then had a short conversation where he asked if I'd been hearing anything weird, and if so, what? And I told him I'd been hearing a voice. He went pale. I described the voice, and he said that it matched what he was hearing. I asked what the voice was saying to him, and he told me it would say his name and call him to come to it. We rode back and told our parents. Dad came riding out in the area with us. He didn't hear anything, and we didn't hear anything while he was there either. We kept hearing the voice over the next few days, always saying the same things. And I remember this happening just 1 year, but I brought it up with my brother recently, and he seems to think it also happened in the same place the following year. So let me start out by saying I enjoy writing, so this will be long. It is non-fiction though, but will hopefully be an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just started to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago, when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day, or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman, who always talks way too loud, was literally whispering by the end of it. And she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely, and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this. And I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother Victor, alias. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like mean house, ugly house, don't like, scary house mama, don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks. So she chalked it up to stress of the move. Now this house was ramshackle as fuck and in the middle of nowhere. And the kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and, until recently before we moved in, still had a working, ancient, wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in, and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 80s. Now on the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done some of the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen, since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100%. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents had told me it gave them the creeps. And a few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our pit Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry, and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going apeshit from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning back and running back toward the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water, full speed. Boss beat her there and drug me out of the water himself. Thank you, Papa. Love you. Although my mom was confused how I got so far, so fast, and how I got into the center of the pond, since it was over my head and I couldn't swim, she figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside, Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door, and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked at us kids, Boss starts going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping. Even baby gate is still shut and locked. But I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off toward the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around, and bark at my mother. Wait for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her almost a mile and a half, out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bone and rotted chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in, at least, one of the few thick stands of trees around. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there, looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scarred or anything, just standing. She rushed over to me, and after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was here, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary, She said I told her, with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here. Shitting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs, and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs and out with me. She demanded to know what children and where the hell they are now. I looked at her, dead serious, and told her the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs, and that I didn't see them anymore. And after a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said, as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there, staring at her, with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said this same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me. So she was always left wondering, and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there is no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road, and in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2, and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she is still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but I haven't yet decided. I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery. Because, whatever the fuck those things were, I really don't think they were children. I've lived in the same house for the past 15 years, and as confusing as it sounds, I've continuously felt as if I never truly belonged there. Like I was simply a guest, intruding upon someone else's property. I often feel very unwelcome in my own home. Out of all of my experiences, however, there is one where I truly felt raw fear, in its purest form. For starters, I have a dog who sleeps with me every night, named Elmo. And on this particular night, about 6 months ago, Elmo was noticeably on edge. He started by pacing the room, occasionally pinning and pulling on my shirt sleeve, repeating this cycle for hours. Me, simply being too tired to care, managed to ignore this odd behavior for a while. I presumed he just wanted to sleep with my sister next door. But, into the earlier hours of the morning, Elmo's behavior abruptly became very aggressive. Once more, I awoke from my light sleep, but instantly became very familiar with the cold, unwelcome sensation I have come to know very well over the years in my house. I looked for Elmo, who has now stopped pacing, and sat on my chair next to my bed, growling and glaring fiercely at a point on the ceiling directly above my head. It was at this point that I was overcome with harsh fight or flight instincts. My head screaming run and danger at me to no end. Numb with fear, I grabbed my still trembling dog and lay back down, clutching Elmo to my chest. He fought against it at first, but soon tired himself out. All the while, still staring straight up at the ceiling, while he whimpered softly. Not knowing what else to do, I stayed awake with my dog, in that same position till my family woke several hours later. I never dared to look at the ceiling that night. And since then, I have always made sure to face the wall in my sleep, my dog clutched tight, in fear of any form of repeat incident. Let me set the scene. I used to own a house near the mountains, in the northern side of Colorado. This was a period of time where I had just gotten fired from my job because of COVID-related reasons, and was home alone. I lived with my roommate at the time, but he went out to some club that night, leaving me alone with my dog. I hate to even think of this, and this is the first time I've ever told anyone besides my neighbors. It was around 8 p.m. on a Friday, and I was watching Friends on the TV. While watching, I heard what sounded like boxes shuffling around in the basement. My dog immediately noticed this and brought his head up. Our basement wasn't finished, and we had a window down there which wasn't in good shape, so I just brushed it off, thinking that the wind was making noises. After a while, the noise never stopped. I decided to grab my light and head down there with my dog. I grabbed my light from the kitchen and opened the door to the basement. I started walking down the stairs, calling my dog. The only thing odd was that my dog decided not to come down, and was making high-pitched noises that dogs make when they are happy or scared. He refused to go down in the basement, and just stood at the top. To give you perspective on how my basement was laid out, was that all my extra stuff from my childhood, like clothes and such, was on the back right corner, so that when you walk down, on the very right, that is where my stuff was. And all my roommate's stuff is right next to mine, on the left. And there was a bench with all the previous owner's stuff, but they left there. So while going down there, the sound was still very clear, and was getting louder and louder the farther I got in there. I saw the window open and making noises, and decided to go close it. As soon as I closed it, I felt like a hand grab my leg. But it wasn't a normal hand. It was super hot. My legs were swooped back and I fell down. All I can remember from this point on was my dog barking extremely loud. I then woke up and found myself in the closet of my roommate's bedroom. I walked downstairs and looked at the time. It was 3 a.m. and my roommate wasn't back yet. I literally looked at the clock and grabbed my phone, dog, and ran outside the front door. I went over to the neighbors around a mile. I ran there, my feet bare. I didn't have a car at the time, by the way. When I got to the neighbors, that I barely knew, I rang the doorbell extremely fast, and around a minute later, a man opened the door and asked why I was ringing his door this late at night, and I could tell he was quite frustrated with me. And I told him everything, and he said that the previous owners moved out because the husband of the house ended up hanging himself in the basement. Well, we talked for a bit while I let my dog run around the back. And I called my roommate and told him not to go home and to come over to the neighbors. Around an hour, he showed up. We all just sat there and talked about what had happened. Around 10 in the morning, I headed back to my house with my roommate to find the sofa flipped, all the doors open, and the cabinets in the kitchen all open, with dishes on the floor broken. I decided to go live with my sister and sell the house around 2 months later. To this day, I'm not sure what that was, and haven't had any other experiences. By the way, something that I didn't tell was that I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I've heard that ghosts thrive off bad energy. I was 11 years old, and was finally trusted to go into the forest, all by myself. I was visiting my grandparents in the Netherlands, in Utrecht. Forgot where exactly, as they moved out ages ago, and decided to venture into the large autumn forest by myself. Keep in mind, I couldn't speak Dutch and didn't know the area too well. The paths were very clear and explicit, but the atmosphere was ominous, as I saw absolutely nobody and heard nothing, bar my own breath. Now I see a rabbit cross the path and begin to follow it. Dumb animal enthusiast kid, to see if it would lead me to a family of rabbits. I haven't traveled for ages, but I lost the path and began to wander the forest, discovering new, less clear and cut-out paths for traveling. I decide I want to go a bit further. The path stops and I reach an area where all the trees have a red cross on them that's barren of any human life. And that's when I heard it. A woman scream. Not blood-curdling, but like a concerned scream. That freaked me out, and I assumed it was on some far-off farm, since they surrounded the general forest area. I decided to head back, and the path was 100 meters from me. That's when the humming and footsteps started. I darted my head in all directions, but could locate nothing, and saw a dirty dildo on the floor. There's no trash or items in the forest. It's very clean, so it was very irregular. This was the last straw of my normality, and I started running. As I ran, Dutch whispers started immersing my hearing from all directions. I only knew a few words, so couldn't piece together a phrase. But this is what I heard when I was submerged in the eeriness. Blood from women, something dead. I hate something boys dead. Something run fast. Something bad. Vague, but I was in fight or flight until I got to the main pathway, and everything halted. But I didn't stop running until I exited the park. Very strange. I constantly question if I fabricated the sound out of anxiety, but it was too lifelike in my memory, and I was on the verge of tears. But I never told my parents, since I didn't want to lose my independence in traveling. There's a lot of castles around the area, and World War II has a lot of history there. So it may be in relation to that, if I'm going for the supernatural. My friend and I were rescued from the ditch during a snowstorm by little phantom people. While returning to New Mexico from a visit to my friend's family in Iowa, we were caught in a snowstorm on the Texas Panhandle. We were on Highway 60, right outside of a town called Canadian, when we went off the road in this little Honda car. We tried digging it out and using the floor mats for traction, but to no avail. We could see what appeared to be the lights of a farmhouse nearby. And although it was 2 a.m., we elected to knock on the door and see if we could get any help, instead of freezing to death in a rare Texas blizzard out in the middle of nowhere. A tiny old woman answered the door, and I mean tiny, 4 foot something and ancient to boot. We explained that we were stuck and needed a pull out of the ditch, and how far to the next town, etc. Her tiny, maybe 5 foot something, ancient husband came out and said he'd pull us out with Zuzu and to follow him to the barn. Out in the barn was an old Ford Highboy with a CB radio and a .357 revolver in the front seat pocket. We all climbed in the cab. He rubbed the dash and said, "Come on, Zuzu," and proceeded to take us to where we had gone off-road and yanked the little car out with no problem. We made it to Canadian and stayed in the nastiest roach motel I'd ever been in, and slept on top of the covers with all my clothes on. The next day, we drove back to New Mexico with no other incidents. Since I was on Highway 60 pretty regularly, I figured I'd stop in a day and drop off a gift and say thanks next time I was in the area. The problem is that right outside of Canadian, Texas, on Highway 60 near the curve, there is no house, no little old people, no barn, no Zuzu either. Now, I've driven by there a dozen times since we went off the road that night in December, and I've pulled up in the area on Google Maps, and there is just no trace of them. My buddy and I just concluded that guardian angels got us unstuck from the snow and vanished. Hey guys, thanks very much for your support. I really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed the rain sounds, and if this is something you want to hear more of. If you liked the video, please leave a like. And if you're new here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button.